This is Season 12 of the Sustainable Asia podcast, mapping the Asia plastic crisis. I am Bonnie Au.
And I'm Marcy Trent Long. Our team at Sustainable Asia partnered with the Heinrich Boell Foundation and Break Free from Plastic Asia Pacific to produce this podcast series. In the last episode, we introduced Japan's Kamikatsu town as the gold standard for a new trend in Asia, zero-waste villages. And other communities in Asia, such as the Philippines' San Fernando City, are following suit. This week, we continue to explore other new ideas coming out of Asian countries and cities to tackle this plastic waste crisis.
To start off, we thought we would hit home where Sustainable Asia is based in Hong Kong, which, unlike its neighbors, has had no new legislation in the last decade on plastic waste management.
So Bonnie spoke to one of the leading NGOs in the city to highlight these issues by focusing on how they're tackling plastic waste in the age of the COVID pandemic.
你介紹下你自己同埋你所屬嘅機構先啦。
大家好，我係Angus Ho 何漢威，咁我係。
Hi, my name is Angus Ho. I'm the founder of Greeners Action. I've been involved in the environmental industry for over 20 years. We, Greeners Action, actually started as a self-initiated student-run group 20 years ago.
咁其實咧，我哋喺2020年嘅10月13
Angus told me about an online survey that they carried out over the course of 2 weeks from October 13 last year. The survey aims to find out customers' behavior on face masks, such as what masks they use, is it a disposable mask or a non-disposable mask? Exactly 1,095 people took part in the survey. I actually remembered filling in one when my cousin shared the link on a WhatsApp group.
我哋發現咧，其實92% 嘅受訪者咧，
The results show that 92% of users use disposable masks. Only 8% use reusable masks. We can then work out an estimate that for the entire population of 7.5 million, we are actually throwing away 54 million per week. So if we put that into perspective, say from February to November, we would have disposed of 2 billion face masks in the 9-month period.
Most survey participants said they use disposable ones because they think they are safer and offer better protection and are more hygienic. Even those who chose to use reusable ones thought the same way. But they opted for the reusable ones mainly because it's less harmful to the environment. Unfortunately, most of the masks consumed in Hong Kong are just disposed of with general household waste in the landfills.
咁我哋就喺網上咧就研究咗可以市面買。
So we then researched 20 different types of reusable masks that are already available on the market. These masks actually reached over 95% particle and bacterial filtration efficiency. So they are just as effective as disposable masks. We hope that this survey will be a wake-up call to the government, forcing them to call for better guidelines for the mask usage.
But there's no movement by the government to introduce such guidelines. And unfortunately, social distancing rules during COVID discourage eat-in dining. So many people were ordering takeaway and shopping online.
因為疫情嘅關係，好多人都去 take away 啦。
We are aware of the rising trend of takeaway orders, and it is so easy for most people to forget that they have the option to bring their own containers downstairs when buying food from their local restaurant. So we helped a campaign called the Fight the Virus with No Plastic to remind people to say no to single-use plastic and encourage a habit change. In return, customers who supported the campaign at our partnering restaurants would be given a small rebate.
個行為上邊嘅改變啦咁樣。
This new norm of ordering takeaway and shopping online that peaked under lockdowns wasn't unique to Hong Kong. In fact, other parts of Asia, such as South Korea, also experienced a boom in online delivery. But the reaction there was a little different.
코로나 전과 비교했을 때
This is Park Da-heeyo from Korea Zero Waste Movement Network.
일단 지금 코로나
I spoke to Da-heeyo to find out how much more waste was generated during the pandemic.
거를 알고 있는데 이제 그게 얼마나 더 악화지고 있는지 설명 조금 부탁드릴게요.
통계가 정확하게 나온 게 없어서
She said that although there are no exact data available yet, estimates suggest an increase of 10% in household waste since the start of the pandemic. But actually, because of the pandemic, she said, the amount of plastic waste accumulated has become so visible that people's awareness for plastic waste has gone up as a result.
South Korea actually has one of the highest recycling rates in the region of around 85%, while plastic stands at 54%.
For us in Hong Kong, Angus told me the latest government figures from 2019 showed a disappointing recycling rate of just 29%.
都有不少人呢係越嚟越
I think that while a lot of people in Hong Kong do hope to reduce waste, I also think the opinions are a little polarized within the society. I think that the government still needs to play a bigger role in plastic waste reduction.
其實我自己覺得咧，基本上接受嘅。
Unlike Hong Kong, Da-heeyo told me why South Korea is able to achieve a relatively high recycling rate. It turns out that there is a NIMBY effect.
우리나라 같은 경우는 다른 나라에 비해서 소각
She explained that in South Korea, there's actually not a lot of land compared to other countries. And because of the NIMBY effect, or not in my backyard, there's bound to be a lot of opposition from people who don't want waste facilities like landfill sites or incinerators near their homes. So realistically, since the option of new facilities is difficult to achieve, Koreans are more willing to reuse and recycle everything. Da-heeyo also emphasized that it's not just the government setting rules, but it also relies on stakeholders and individuals working together towards a mutual goal.
국가들은 정부가 먼저
She said, compared to other countries which usually take a top-down approach, the South Korean government gives an overall guideline, and corporates and civic groups take the initiative to set up their own goals to reduce plastic waste. And the reduction rate has significantly gone up in the past 3 years.
굉장히 높아졌어요.
South Korea's ambitious plastic waste and recycling programs were also inspired by a 2018 announcement that took the waste world by storm. China banned imports of 24 waste categories, including unsorted plastic. Shortly after that, South Korea's Ministry of Environment announced a national action plan and a roadmap to tackle their waste problem.
The goal is to cut down plastic waste generation by half by 2030 and to increase recycling rate to 70%. As part of the implementation of these goals, the government would phase out plastic items that are hard to recycle and enforce producer responsibility on the end life of products and packaging. The policy aims to reduce waste by 20% at the manufacturing phase and achieve zero landfilling of domestic waste.
This is Doun, a researcher at GAIA, the Global Alliance of Incinerator Alternatives. GAIA aims to advance systematic change towards zero waste across the globe. She told me that the policy package also includes ban on plastic bags, single-use cups, straws, footwear, and single-use hygiene products that were often found in the unsorted imported waste.
After China imposed a new ban on waste import, there have been a lot more countries who imposed the same kind of bans. And this kind of moves are pushing the countries who had been exporting waste in the past toward seeking fundamental solutions rather than finding other destinations.
And South Korea is one of those destinations.
The amount of plastic imported to Korea went up by 5 times in the first 4 months of China's waste import ban. In June 2020, the Korean government announced a ban on importation of waste for 4 types of plastic, and that's because the amount of plastic waste that was shipped to Korea more than doubled in 2018. But Korea has enough plastic waste to grapple with, so that's why it announced a new ban on 4 types of plastic. And it's too soon to talk about the impact because it has not been fully implemented yet.
지금 한국 정부가 로드맵을 내놨는데 이거는 지속적으로
And here's
이어나갈
Da-heeyo
거고요.
again.
그리고 기업과
She said the government will continue to work step by step towards its goal, while other stakeholders are making efforts to switch to more eco-friendly alternatives, such as setting up more refilling stations and expanding markets with zero packaging.
So it looks like South Korea has really been pushing forward. What about us in Hong Kong?
I think the government is using the easy way out solving issues with money. For example, they will pay a bunch of contractors to manage the recycled items, or set up a couple of communal connection points. But they never thought about solving the problem upstream, as this requires negotiating with corporates, businesses, like supermarket chains, and the government may face pressure from those industries. I don't see the government having the firmness to deal with this.
Angus has reasons to be skeptical. Since the first waste blueprint published by the government in 2013, waste per capita has reached record highs rather than decreasing.
I actually think if other countries like South Korea are able to ban single-use plastic, Hong Kong should be able to do the same. It is really up to the government whether they have the perseverance to push these initiatives forward.
Hong Kong recently published a new waste blueprint with a midterm goal to reduce the per capita municipal solid waste disposal rate by 40 to 45% and raise the recovery rate to about 55%, with a long-term goal to move away from the reliance on landfills for direct waste disposal by building a circular economy. Encouraging, but the jury is still out.
We're now going to turn our lens to India, where waste pickers or the informal sector form the foundation of the waste management work there.
My name is Lakshmi. I am one of the founders of an organization called Paper, Tin, Metal Workers Organization. It's essentially a trade union of waste pickers based in Pune, Maharashtra, in India. I saw plastics through the eyes of waste pickers, really. So I've learned to associate like they do. Some plastics as good, some as bad, those that are recyclable, those that are not. More than 60% of waste in India does get recycled, and more than 80% of what is recycled due to the informal sector. Unfortunately, across the world and definitely in Asia, where we have a strong recycling sector, it is the front-end soldiers of the recycling sector who are the base of the pyramid, the waste pickers, who are typically treated as responsible for the plastics that are not recycled. Not only are they not responsible for creating it, but they actually are, for the most part, responsible for any kind of recycling that happens, and yet they get the blame.
As Lakshmi said, the impacts of plastic pollution have been harder on the poor, including waste pickers across Asia. So I wanted to know if COVID-19 made the situation worse.
So during COVID, actually, all prices dropped, but that was really more than anything else because of the very intense lockdown in India. Most scrap shops were closed because recyclers were closed. And because recyclers and scrap shops were closed, waste collectors could simply not retrieve the plastics because there was no place they could sell it to, and there was simply no place to store such large volumes of plastics. And therefore, there was a long period when these materials simply didn't get recycled.
So let's take a step back and find out more about how India's recycling system works.
So there are national, state and city level regulations. The actual waste collection systems, the levels of decentralization that are appropriate for each city, the models that need to operate within the city for waste collection and for waste processing are very often determined by the local municipality.
And Lakshmi said in some cities like Pune, where she lives and works, there's a fairly strong representation of waste pickers.
They've been organized and they're fairly empowered and able to articulate and advocate for their integration in waste collection. But in many parts of the country, the collection of waste is outsourced to small or large contractors or sometimes even large companies who collect the waste from the doorstep or from containers and take it to centralized plants or landfill sites, which are usually often not really landfill sites but dump sites.
So the regulations in India seem somewhat varied from city to city.
What gets recycled depends largely on how economically viable it is to recycle anything.
So almost a capitalistic system for recycling. And Lakshmi said recycling in her country is effectively subsidized by very poor people who are willing to retrieve that last piece of paper or plastic or metal because it has value.
So when we're talking about some kinds of plastics that don't get recycled, they are so low down the value chain that it's simply not viable even for the poorest waste picker to break her back picking up that last piece of plastic and recycling it, because it cannot go through the logistic costs and processes of transportation and baling and pre-processing and sorting and then getting recycled into a product that finally doesn't have the kind of market that makes the entire process viable.
I asked her to give some examples for these low-value plastics, the plastics that don't provide value to the waste pickers.
So we're talking about the plastic bags that are used to package biscuits and chocolates. And in India, particularly in Asia, actually, we have these very small sachets where manufacturers are selling shampoo for a single use, conditioners for a single use, ketchup, and all kinds of consumables in very, very small quantities.
Lakshmi said she's been trying to work with manufacturers to get more of this type of plastic packaging recycled.
So one of the things that we've been arguing is that the manufacturers of low-value plastics pay the viability gap funding to ensure that their product gets recycled. And if the viability gap funding is too high and it's simply not viable for them to pay it, then they simply stop manufacturing those products.
So in a sense, Lakshmi is pushing for some kind of a polluter pay program in Pune, where producers of multi-layer or cheap plastic integrate waste pickers into their waste collection strategy.
They pay a price so that not only is it viable for her to pick it, but that it is viable for the system to transport it to where it is baled and then sent for recycling. If you're looking at the cumulative wages of all the waste pickers across the city and what they earn per month, it is a good around 8 to 10% increase in their earnings. And it's just one more material that they collect along with everything else. It's ensuring that all these plastics are getting diverted from the landfill.
Pune in India is admirably trying to find solutions to multi-layer plastic recycling and integrating waste pickers at the same time, working with low-paid, underappreciated workers that are the backbone of many recycling systems here in Asia.
It seems that new solutions are coming out of Asia's backyard for dealing with plastic waste.
Perhaps China's bold move to ban plastic imports is in the long run a win-win globally.
It definitely alarmed many countries into reviewing their own recycling systems, and it created the impetus for new plastic waste import bans in many Asian countries.
And in a way, it helped propel many Asian nations to create plastic waste reduction goals. Could it be that Asian countries are becoming the solution hub for the decades-old plastic waste deluge?
In the upcoming final episode, we'll be hearing from our guests and experts on how the plastic waste crisis isn't just polluting our planet Earth, but how it's contributing to one of the greatest challenges of our lifetime, climate change. Thank you to our partner, the Heinrich Boell Foundation, for allowing us to use the formidable research behind their new upcoming publication, Plastic Atlas Asia. Heinrich Boell Stiftung is a green think tank from Germany and has more than 30 offices around the world. They produce a series of excellent publications, including Ocean Atlas and Agriculture Atlas. Plastic Atlas and Plastic Atlas Asia can be found on their website and also on that of Break Free from Plastic. This podcast series was produced by Sustainable Asia. My name is Marcy Trent Long. Our co-host, producer, editor, and sound engineer extraordinaire is Bonnie Au. Joshing Lee is the associate producer. A big thank you to our guests Angus Ho, Park Da-heeyo, Doun Moon, Lakshmi Narayan. Special thanks to Break Free from Plastic for their support of our project, including Von Hernandez and Satyarupa Shekhar and Jed Alagado. Alexander Mobison created the intro-outro music made of repurposed and recovered waste items.